You want to take your Bibles and turn to the book of Galatians. Continuing our study here in Galatians Chapter 4. Galatians 4. The other day I had a little hunger for some China buffet. And I do like China buffet. I like all the chicken with sweet different things on it and fried and all that kind of good stuff. I don't know if I call it good. It tasted good. But I have a love-hate relationship with all buffets. And that is that when I go there and I spend my money in the buffet, I want to get my money's worth. Several years ago, we went to a pizza ranch. I don't know if you've ever been to a pizza ranch. It's a pizza buffet. It's kind of a chain thing, a little bit over in Wisconsin and out in the Midwest. We were traveling out west, and it was the first day of our vacation. We were going, I think, to, that time we were going to like Mount Rushmore and all the way out that direction, Montana. And first night of vacation. So we go, it's like, well, let's go to Pizza Ranch. Well, I went there, and by the time my wife and I, and then my mom was with us, and we had 4 kids, and my kids were just, at the time, I think Bethany was like 12 or 13 years old, something like that. And it was like $60 or $70 for us for pizza. Well, normally pizza's the cheap meal. And I'm like, you know what, kids? You eat. And you keep eating because we paid this money. The bad thing is they got sick, like, for a while because I made them eat too much. Well, when I go to buffets, I want to get my money's worth. And it's so hard for me when I don't, so I learned, actually, I wanted to go to the China buffet, but I thought, let's get it to go. So if we get a container, they weigh it by the pound, you pay by a pound, so you can get the food without necessarily stuffing yourself. Now, I did discover it was probably almost as much how much I loaded my plate with to pay by the pound as it was as if I would have eaten there, but I divided that up into 2 meals, so it worked a little bit better. Why? Because it's something there that I felt like if I pay this money, I just got to keep up eating. I want to make sure I eat my money's worth. There's just something about that obligation in my mind. That's why I kind of try to avoid most buffets, because it's really tough in my mind to get that settled. We're going to be reminded once again as we look through Galatians and we see the idea of obligation. And Paul is challenging the believers who were feeling so obligated to follow the law as part of the religion. And we're going to be reminded the importance of obligation compared to the freedom of choice. And not because we have to follow God, but because we want to follow God. If you remember, as we've been studying here through the book of Galatians is basically, Paul has been just step by step reiterating himself, bringing up new points to emphasize to the Galatians, you don't have to go back in slavery to this religious law, these religious rules. Then last week we saw we've been set free to be a child of God, to be able to go to Him and call Him Abba, Father, or Daddy, this term of endearment and this term of love, that we can go to God with this understanding that He is not a slave master, but He is our Father. Verse 9, but now that you have come to know God, or rather be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain. That's where we finished last week, because they were basically placing such an emphasis on following certain days or certain rules or certain set patterns that you have to do in order to be a religious person. Now, why does Paul spend the first 4 chapters of Galatians, and really even in the beginning of chapter 5, why does he spend such a great deal on this? Because he knows the natural human tendency of us to follow the elementary principles of the world, especially some people who have this natural religious tendency, and they just hook on to some type of denominational rules or organizational rules or religious rules that maybe have been passed down. Maybe they were good rules at one time, or they're still good rules, but the rules then become the focus of what they do. And it's easy for us to become the same and let the rules of a religion take over of what we have to do and forget about the grace of God, and our desire should be to want to do it because of what Christ has done for us. Roman numeral number 1, God wants us to live in freedom. Last week we saw how we were free from the law. We were free from the things that Paul said are quote-unquote gods that aren't really gods. Now this can go two ways. We have the gods of sensuality, where we often, if you're a religious person, when you think of a false god, you often think of the god of the pleasure of this world. In fact, the Old Testament Israelites struggled with this often. They wanted to seek after the gods of this world in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, the Jews were different. But the Jews went the complete other way, and they struggled with the god of self when it came to the god of their religion. And their religion became God rather than the God the religion was supposed to direct them towards. And that's really what Paul is emphasizing here in Galatians 5. Now, other places, Paul addresses the gods of sensuality. I don't know how I did that. When he addressed here the gods of sensuality, he does that in other places. But here the focus is directly, specifically towards those who have made religion a god. Now that almost seems kind of strange to us. I've grown up in a Christian home ever since I was born, and get the idea that religion can become God, but yet we see it all the time. I look back in my life and see there's times where I let the religious activity become far more important than the one who it is to direct me for. We're told in Romans Chapter 1, it becomes the very thing that people then tend to start worshiping nature rather than the God who created it. We see churches today, I think of like a Roman Catholic church. Many times they have different objects and things set up that people start to pray to, and they say, well, we're not really praying to that, though they bow down to it and light candles to it and pray to this, and saying, well, we're actually kind of, and make an excuse for it. But the reality is, it's easy to let the religion become the God. And that's what Paul is addressing here. What happens when that takes place is we become a slave to that religion, and we start to lose the joy and the thrill and the amazement of worshiping a true living God. So we see letter A, we need to live as free men. Verse 12 of Galatians 4. Brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. That's an interesting phrase. What does Paul mean? Become as I am. Paul grew up a Jew. In fact, in Philippians, he says, I was the Jew of the Jews. I was the best Jew. We also saw that earlier in Galatians. I was the best Jew there could be in the sense of following the law. But I've been set free from that. And he says, I want you to become like me, because I become like the Gentiles, not in the sense of worshiping the sensual things of the world, but I'm free from the obligation of the law to worship God. So I want you to become as me. You know, there's such an important difference between the I have to and I want to. And it's very easy to cross over that line at the time, because we could have the same action and have completely different reasons behind what we do, which will produce completely different results. So last week, Jen and I took a trip to the Thumb area of Michigan. We'd never been there and never explored around it. When I was a kid, I was there once. I barely remember anything. So we went back there, and we went up the thumb and then down the thumb. And then Jen wanted to go down to the place where the St. Clair River runs into to Lake St. Clair. It's a place called Algonac. Anybody ever been to Algonac? Okay, a handful you have. Now, when I hear the word Algonac, I have this hatred in my mind. Hatred is probably a strong word, but a very strong dislike for Algonac. Now, why would I not like Algonac? All right, let me put the scenario here. 10-year-old Scott. Football season, Lions games on TV. By the way, most Lions games when I was a kid were not on TV, the home games in Detroit, because they'd always be blacked out because they could never sell them out at the Silverdome. So I didn't get to see most of the home games when I was a kid. Games on TV. Ready to watch it. And my parents say, hey, let's take a family trip to Algonac today. Algonac, what do you do? Okay, you go to Algonac and there's this park. It's a long park. It's like half a mile long. There's no playgrounds there, but there's benches, lots of benches that face the water, because what happens is these big freighters will come through, because any of the shipping that goes down by up Detroit and out to the Atlantic or that direction comes through there. And, as a kid, big boats were okay, but not near as important as the Lions game. And then what do? For 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon, you sit there and watch one big boat right after another. If they come through, come through. Now, the only good thing about it was my parents took us to Dairy Queen afterward. That's the only good thing that I think about in Algonac. So Jen's like, let's go down to Algonac. My first response is, oh, well, I'm hoping the Dairy Queen's still in business. So we go down to Algonac, get there. The Dairy Queen was in business, so we got some ice cream, and we sat and we watched. And at that time, we didn't see any big boats come through, but we sat and we watched the lake and the river. It was really enjoyable. I'm like, this isn't so bad. I would do this again. Well, what's the difference? 10-year-old Scott didn't like it, was forced to, hated it. 50-year-old Scott sits there, enjoys eating his ice cream with his wife, seeing this beautiful view. Perspective has changed, attitude changed, joy about it changes everything. The very same action. But yet the motive behind it was completely different. Everything about it was different. And really we see that compared to when we do something because we have to, or we do it because we want to. We need to live as free men. And when we do that, letter B, we live out the joy that's found in freedom. The end of verse 12, Paul says, you did me no wrong. You know that it was because of, you did me no wrong. You know that it was because of bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn me or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus. Paul says, when I first went down to visit you, and I visited you there in Galatia, and I shared the gospel with you, you received me openly. And even though I had an ailment, basically he kind of looked pretty bad. Now we don't know what it is. Verse 15 says, what then has become of your blessedness? For I testify of you that if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and give them to me. Now most likely Paul had some type of physical ailment that had to do with his eyes. Now, if you remember, he was also stoned to death in Galatia, so it could be a reference after he was stoned to death. He probably would have looked pretty miserable. I mean, if you had a bunch of rocks thrown at your face and body continually, your face would be puffed up. You'd look pretty miserable. Whatever it is, we don't know. But basically, he says, when I first came to you, I didn't look so good physically. But you listened to my message. You received me with grace. You loved me. You cared about me. You would have given yourself for me because you found the freedom of your salvation. Freedom from your enslavement to your false gods. Freedom from enslavement to religion. And when I first shared the gospel with you, you had this love for me. You eagerly received me. but now you've changed. Earlier this year at one of our rentals, we had a lady that was renting a few different spots from us, and then she started renting some campsites from us. We have a few campsites, and she was fairly regular, and she was very friendly and helpful. We'd have some conversations with her. But one of the things she was doing was she was parking her vehicle by some of the other campers and to get internet. And I said, look, you can't do that. You got to park because they're scaring the people and the campers. And I told her where she needed to park. Well, all of a sudden she got upset at me. She packed up her stuff and she left. Never seen or heard from her again. I thought that's interesting. It's not necessarily that unusual because a lot of times we've tried to help people out who've been kind of down and out or need a place to stay or whatever, and they're fine until you give them rules. I've learned if you want to get rid of somebody right away and to see if they really just want to mooch off you or if they really need help, give them some rules. If you give them some rules and guidelines, that'll often tell you if they really need help. Now, I'm not a very good rule person. You guys know that, so it's very hard. I normally need my wife to say, look, give them this rule, establish this for them, because if not, I'm a pushover. I really am in certain things. And here, though, what happened, Paul says, look, at first you guys loved me, you cared for me, you embraced my soul, but now you're treating me as if I'm an enemy. And it reminds them to embrace the truth. Verse 16. Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? You know, we all have this tendency. When somebody tells or shares the truth with us, we often kind of want to shy away from that. We're scared many times. I know I had a lady in the church in Wisconsin. I remember one time specifically, she sat down with me and she says, look, I really want to grow spiritually. I think we've developed enough of a rapport with one another. If you see anything in my life that really needs change or addressing or anything, please let me know. I made the mistake and I believed her. So there was something that came up, nothing big, it was just a minor thing. She was just a little bit upset about something, just a really little minor thing. And I said, you know, we talked about this before, and this is something I think would make a difference. She got upset with me, she left the church, her husband left the church, and their kids, and that was it. Why? Because what they were doing is I was just trying to share what I believe was the truth or direct to help. And Paul says, look, I want you to think about the truth. I'm telling you the truth. Why is the truth caused such a problem? It's because, letter D, the deception of the enemy. We have to be so on guard for the enemy that is out there to try to deceive us, to pull us away. Paul says they make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out that you make much of them. Paul basically says, look, they're kissing up to you. They're trying to make you feel like you're such a great and wonderful person ultimately because they want you to join their crowd so that they can feel good about themselves. They don't care about you at all. They're just simply in it for themselves, and yet it's so easy to be buttered up by somebody else that you don't see this. He says it's always good to be made much of for a good purpose, and not only when I am present with you. He said there's nothing wrong with people trying to make you feel good and better about yourself. But Paul says they're doing it to try to spite me. They want to take you away from the gospel that I have shared with you. As I thought about this, I thought about when Jen and I were in Israel. We spent a lot of time in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, they have these open air markets that you walk through. And as you're walking by, especially if you're the only one, they have, and this is repeated over and over and over again. You walk by, and what they'll do is they'll call out, hey friend, hey my friend. They want to get your attention first. Then they'll be observant. They observe what you wear. If you say something that says Michigan or Detroit or USA or something, they say, oh, are you from Michigan? Or they'll ask, where are you from? You'll say, well, I'm from the USA. And they say, oh, where at? And you'll say Michigan. Oh, Michigan. Michigan, and then they'll start to give cities. They'll start to say Detroit, Ann Arbor, Muskegon, whatever, and they'll start spouting all these cities in Michigan that they know. And then they'll say, if you say something, they'll say, oh, I have a friend who lived in Michigan, or I traveled, or whatever, to Michigan. And then they'll do this conversation, and they'll start to talk, like they really care. And all of a sudden they'll say, come into my store. I want to show you. I have this special thing for you that'll be great in Michigan. And so they'll bring this thing into you. Now, I'm walking away while my wife is so kind and caring, is like following behind them and to go in the store with them, when I'm like, no, let's not do that. And then when you say no to them, it's like, what, you don't like my goods? How come you don't like me? It's interesting. But what's taking place here is these false teachers are basically putting down Paul and exalting themselves. They're exalting his believers. And Paul says, you're missing the truth because it sounds so good to you. You're being deceived by the enemy because you're not listening or thinking about the truth. Letter E, we need to be concerned about the well-being of others. The false teachers cared more about themselves, how they look good, rather than the actual people themselves, what the people were believing. Verse 19, my little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I'm perplexed about you. Paul says, I just care about you. I care about your soul. I care about your joy. I care about what Jesus is doing for you. That's what I care about. I don't care about me. I don't care about me being exalted. I don't care about people saying, wow, what a great person you are, Paul, because you have so many followers. It's very easy for religions to become so focused on numbers. Years ago, we had a missionary when I was in Wisconsin pastoring. We had a missionary that we supported, and he was like in Scotland, I think, Scotland or England, and every month he would report back and say, well, we had 30 people come to know Jesus, and the next month was 35 come to know Jesus, and then it was 40, and then sometimes it was back down to 25 or 30, and it's every month. And yet he struggled to have 10 people in his church. And I'm like, how come all these people are really, quote unquote, being saved and they're not coming to church? Well, I understand what it was, and I've talked to many missionaries. They're like, look, there's a lot of churches, if we don't give them certain numbers and results, they'll drop our support. Why? Because we play the numbers game. Now, naturally, as people, what do? If I am a successful businessman, what happens is the numbers show in my bank account. Numbers are important when it comes to certain things because it shows if we're successful or not in the world. But when religion becomes so important, focused on numbers, they're focused on the wrong thing. And Paul says, look, I care for your soul. That's the most important thing to me. There's many churches today in the United States. Even churches that I think preach the gospel find themselves focused more on numbers because they want to give the people what they hear, because they say they're concerned for the people, but ultimately it makes them look good because I'm the pastor of a church that has 1,000 people or 2,000 people. And I'm not saying this is everybody. I'm not naming certain names because I don't know people's hearts. But what I do see is what happens is we then focus on what people want to hear, and we're not really concerned for their souls. Paul says, look, I am challenging you. I'm giving you what you need to hear. And he challenges them, Roman numeral number 2, to live as children of the promise. We've seen this theme so far, the idea of promise compared to slavery, and he continues this thought here. Letter A, we need to think about what the truth actually is. I know that's probably bad grammar, but it's the best way I can think to put it together. Verse 21, tell me, You who deserve to be under the law. Do you not listen to the law? Okay, he says, you guys who want to say I'm following the law and do all the law, let's look at the law. So he uses the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, as an example. He goes back to Genesis and the story of Abraham. Verse 22. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman, one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through the promise. All right, let's remember back. Earlier this year, we talked about Abraham when we went to the book of Genesis. Abraham was given a promise that through Sarah, you will have a son that will produce a great nation. We know eventually that son was going to be Isaac. But that wasn't happening for a while, so what they do is basically Abraham and Sarah agree to give Hagar to Abraham as a wife. Abraham and Hagar have a child together called Ishmael. So you have two sons which really produce two opposing great nations, as we saw through the book of Genesis. So he's using this as an illustration. Verse 24. Now this may be interpreted allegorically, or basically we would say like an illustration. These two women are two covenants. So two different things we see from these women, the covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. So he says, Hagar is like Mount Sinai or the law. So Hagar is like the law. And now what we have, he says, and then verse 25, now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds with the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. So now he says, look, the present Jerusalem, kind of like what we would say, if we would say, boy, that comes out of Washington. What are we saying? It's political. It comes out of D.C. There he says when it comes out of Jerusalem, he's not recalling the actual physical place, but it's the idea of what Jerusalem teaches and emphasizes was the law. So he compares the earthly Jerusalem with Hagar and Sinai, the law, getting to heaven by following what's right. Just a minute. There we go. By following the law and doing what the law has to say. So he compares that. But verse 26, the Jerusalem above, so as I talked about the new Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, what he really desires for Jerusalem is free. She is our mother. So he talks about the heavenly Jerusalem compared to Sarah and the promise, the earthly Jerusalem, our earthly efforts and what we do. He compares that to Hagar. The two different ones. The result of the promise, the result of giving into our flesh. Verse 27, for it is written, rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. This is a quote of Isaiah 54:1 that talks about the restoration of Jerusalem. Again, it pictures two Jerusalems. It pictures God's desire of restoration and hope and trust in Him compared to the current Jerusalem at the time that was all about what you can do by following the law. He says, this is our example, and it's not God's plan for you to be enslaved, but instead let her be. It's planned for us to be free. Verse 26, for the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. It's about freedom, not slavery. And ultimately, Roman numeral number 3, God wants us to cast out the religion in our lives. Again, that's a strange thing. What do you mean? You're a pastor and you're telling me to cast out religion? Well, yes and no. It depends your definition and how you are using religion. I mentioned this many times. When I do something religiously, it's often for a good thing because it's part of discipline. But if that discipline or that object or that thing becomes more important than the reason that I'm doing it, it's defeating its purpose. And what happens many times is we set up religious rules or regulations, many times for a good purpose. But when that becomes the focus of what we do, we lose the main purpose, and the main understanding is not ourselves, but should be focused on Jesus Christ. You see, letter A, the flesh often tries to stop the spirit. Verse 28, now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of the promise. But just as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it does now. Remember at the story of Hagar and Ishmael, how Ishmael was making fun of Isaac, and eventually Abraham and Sarah cast him out along with Hagar. And here he's using this as an illustration that when we have and we welcome back this slavery into our lives, it's going to destroy us. Instead, what we need to do is we need to cast it out. Because there's a battle between our flesh and the spirit. Now again, this could go both ways. When we talk about the flesh, it could go a battle with our sensuality compared to our holiness, but it also could be the battle with ourself, being a good person compared to ourself, realizing I cannot be good, I need the Spirit. We struggle with that. We can struggle both ways by becoming really over-religious, focusing on the religion, and missing out on the freedom in Christ. Letter B, those who are self-righteous in the church need to be confronted. Verse 30, what does the Scripture say? Cast out the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. Now again, he's using the example of Hagar and Ishmael being cast out. What does he say? He says, confront it, stop it. Verse 31, brothers, we are not the children of the slave, but of the free woman. We're not children of the slave, but of the free woman. Now, I don't know where everybody is this morning, what background you all come from, religious or not religious. Everybody has tendencies one way or the other, some stronger, some weaker in certain areas. But there is a natural tendency, even the longer that you've been a follower of Jesus Christ, to get settled into a religion. And now you start looking down on other people because I think I am better than they are. Because I do this, I do this, I don't do this, I don't do this. The prime example that Jesus gave would be the story of the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, or the tax collector, where the Pharisee stands up and says, I am so thankful I'm not like this publican here because I fast twice a week and I do this. And he gives all his religious things that he does to show he's a good person. And it says the publican he couldn't even lift up his head. He beats at his chest. He says, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And Jesus related that true child of God, the true one is forgiven, is not the religious one who thinks he's better, but the publican who knows he's not. And it's a challenge for all of us. The more we follow Christ, the more righteous we become and live for Him. It's easy then to start trusting in ourselves and lose our trust in God. The end result, we lose our joy. It becomes something we have to do. It becomes something we do to impress others. Something to try to get other people to look at us and say, wow, look at you. Rather than they want to follow Christ because they see the joy and love in our hearts. In conclusion, I want to ask you these questions. First, are you living in freedom? Are you following Christ because you want to or because you have to? Now, that doesn't mean you get up every day, yippee, I get to read my Bible today. And maybe you do, but some days you're just tired. You just don't feel like it, or even going to church, whatever it is. Doesn't mean you always have to feel like it, but yet you know it's important. You do it because you want to grow in your relationship with Christ. When you live in freedom, it doesn't mean you do whatever you want. I've taught financial classes, and one of the terms we often use in the class is financial freedom. Financial freedom doesn't mean I can spend money on whatever I want to spend it on, not at all. It means I spend it on the things that I really want. I'm free because I'm not under the obligations of a loan to pay somebody off, or trapped under having to spend money on whatever it is that I don't really want. So freedom doesn't mean do whatever you want. That's not at all what religious freedom is. But freedom is I am free to follow Christ because and as a result of the grace of God and what Jesus has done for me, not in order to follow some religious set of rules. Secondly, are you living as a child of the promise? Do you walk by faith, dependence on God, or you depend on yourself? It's easy to depend on ourselves for so much rather than depend on God. And lastly, are you careful about religion in your life? Now again, for many people I think that would sound strange. Are you careful about religion? And again, I think doing things is religiously is very important. But I've seen so many examples, I've seen it in my life, where my religion becomes so important. I'll give you an example. I used to wake up at 4:45 every morning. I had to, when my kids were little, I was, at that time, I think, training for a marathon, and I was spending time in my devotions and spending time doing this, and I get up at 4:45 every morning. And it was a discipline. It was good at first, but it became almost like this in my mind, like, look, I'm better than you because I get up at 4:45 while you're still sleeping, and I read my Bible, and I pray, and I do all these things before you even roll out of bed, so I'm a better person than you. No, I didn't verbally tell anybody that, but I started to develop that mentality. Now, thankfully, I've gotten out of that. I don't get up near that time anymore at all. Of course, I don't go to bed real early either, but it's so easy to let these things exalt ourselves because of how good we are, rather than understand we are nothing. Christ is everything. I want to serve him and follow him and love him because of what he's done for me. We're going to bow your heads and close your eyes. Just take a moment to let God speak to your heart and mind this morning.